Topic 4 is the ministry leader's role in working with people in ministry and their trauma. I think identifying the ministry leader's role is crucial for caring for people who have experienced trauma, and being sensitive and careful to recognize and limit and stay in the boundaries of pastoral care and spiritual caregiving, and knowing what those boundaries are for us, and identifying the indicators for how do we refer someone, when and how, and what do we look for connecting them to services outside the scope of spiritual care and pastoral care. So when we're doing work in ministry and with people, trauma is a big part of a lot of people's lives and history. And so we're going to have people we're ministering to and leading that have trauma history. And we need to think about what is the difference between therapeutic resources versus spiritual. And both are so powerful and needed, I think, holistically for someone seeking healing, and are equally important, but very different parts of someone's healing journey and support. And thinking through the boundaries of that, and how spiritual leaders really provide soul care to those who are wrestling through trauma, and how that impacts now their life and spiritual life and their connection and experience of God. And how and when we can refer and partner and work with other services in the community and experts so that we can really help our people find breakthrough in the healing that they need. So I think that there's spiritual seasons of the soul, and I believe that everyone who experiences trauma, as we talked about in the last topic, really does begin to enter some level of a spiritual existential crisis. And I think this is a time of inner conflict where a person is distraught and wrestling in angst, anger, guilt, shame, questioning with God, their faith, maybe the church, wrestling about identity, meaning, and purpose, coming from the place of something that has happened to them that's painful. And so I think that spiritual caregiving is sitting with people in places of support when they are wrestling in their spiritual life, going through maybe what we even refer to as a dark night of the soul, as we see referenced by people such as St. John of the Cross historically, when there are seasons people go through difficult things and it's dark and they question and wonder where God is, and that a spiritual caregiver helps someone supporting them through that journey as a companion to come to reconciliation and reconnection in finding safety with God. And so I think in this place, when someone experiences trauma, there's generally two responses, and that's either religious departure and pain from faith in God and the faith community. And I think that that can lead to deconstruction. And so these people still have a lot of pain they need to process with God and faith in the church. Maybe their trauma was connected to a person of faith or a faith community, and they experienced abuse in those settings, or a home connected to faith. And they really need help with a spiritual safe person re-representing God to them and helping them find reconciliation and healing from that community that they've found wounding in. Or people are in a place of deep religious defense, which is when they're refusing to kind of explore the disconnection between belief and experience in their life, and faith becomes this coping defense mechanism to hide what they're really feeling. And so this is where we still want to help people have space and be given permission to question and wrestle and enter into a dark night of the soul and questioning, and that that's healthy and good, and that that's a place God's big enough to handle and meet them, where he really can bring them breakthrough and healing. And so I think when we see people in this place, it keeps them from breakthrough, and their spiritual life can become triggering or re-traumatizing. And we don't want that for people. We want them to find safety and restoration with God. So I think in the spiritual seasons of the soul, as the pastor walks people through spiritual existential crisis, they're a co-sufferer, they're a non-anxious presence where they're offering a ministry of presence, lots of mostly active listening, open-ended, compassionate questions, helping someone to think and process, and even in that, leaving space and silence and validating people and what they're feeling and their emotions and going through. Whether or not the theology of what they're saying is accurate in our beliefs, we validate the human experience and emotions that they're having. And so this looks like when Jesus is on the cross and he's expressing as a human that it feels like God has forsaken him and isn't there. And just as people feel that in their trauma and go through that, we sit, we listen, we co-suffer with them. We bring them out of isolation and their suffering, and that they're not alone. And we don't try to change or fix how they feel, We're being a presence who is with them in the dark night of the soul and helping reconnect them to reconciliation with the suffering servant, Jesus. So spiritual caregiving is really important for those who've experienced trauma. I believe it's a crucial part of their healing and finding meaning and purpose from the midst of the chaos and the evil and pain they've experienced. And I've found that purpose and meaning isn't something that even psychology can fully answer. Psychology is powerful because it helps us process and actually heal from trauma and to look at all the ways that has impacted us in our relationships. But spiritual caregivers really can be sensitive and help someone process the spiritual side, and they can help heal and connect people to find safety in God instead of further wounding or re-traumatizing them and really pushing them away from faith community. And so I think this is a powerful role that spiritual caregivers play. And there's boundaries, I think, and limits that come within that we need to acknowledge in ministry and as leaders. And I think we acknowledge that spiritual care and pastoral care is not the same as therapy. It's not a licensed mental health professional. And so in that sense, pastoral care should not be therapy and trying to do that with someone. And that it is a form of spiritual and emotional caregiving that's sitting with someone as a co-sufferer and guide through their spiritual seasons of their soul they're experiencing and how what they're going through is impacting their life and relationship with God in spiritual crisis. And so I think the attributes we really see come to the forefront of ministry leaders and pastoral caregivers is that idea of being someone who is sharing the presence of God and his heart and compassion, who's listening, who's asking questions to help bring someone deeper on a journey of seeing themselves and reflecting and connecting to God and how what they're going through is impacting their experience or belief about God, and really helping them to try to grow in those ways, connecting them to spiritual resources that are grounding, spiritual rhythms and disciplines that are helpful in coping skills that are spiritual, and connecting them into community from a place of isolation. Faith community is powerful and healing is found in community, and to make meaning and make sense of what they've been through and how to find purpose for life for themselves and identity that's deeply rooted. So I think in this, pastoral caregivers and ministry leaders, a huge part of our role is referring people and acknowledging the limits of our expertise and what we're doing with people, and having a mind to be holistic and really desire our people to seek healing in every area and get them the help they need. So I think we need to watch for the signs of trauma, know about it and how it affects people and their lives and relationships, and what are some of the signs and symptoms of that, and what things in people's history even are considered trauma, or signs such as substance use and coping that's unhealthy that could even indicate there's history there for someone to explore, and helping connect them to healing and therapeutic resources. I also think setting a boundary in the space and time, and when people try to utilize you as a ministry or caregiver leader that's beyond your boundaries and scope of expertise, really setting boundaries and even sharing with people that that's a really important thing, that you want to get them the support they need, and you want to help refer and connect them to the place that can help walk with them in that area. I think something we need to be careful of in ministry and as leaders and pastoral caregivers is to avoid re-traumatizing people. And so I think that means bringing trauma awareness and training into our ministries and understanding what it looks like in people and how it impacts them in their life and choices, so that we can have compassion and understanding. I think we need to be careful with those spiritual platitudes we talked about in the last topic as well, and be careful with the way we may try to encapsulate a whole theological statement in one sentence or of comfort and quick fixes and answers using even well-meaning spiritual statements, rather than really sitting in active listening, validating, open-ended questions, silence. And I think we need to be careful with those quick fixes and answers to not use theology as a way to quickly answer people in their pain. And in reflecting upon this in scripture, the Pharisees often were people who, the way they wielded scripture, really wounded or heaped religious burdens on other people. And I think we want to avoid this, and in the heart of Jesus, learn what it means to walk in his way of co-suffering and really caring for people with compassion as he did. As we sit in the tension with them, we avoid minimizing their pain, and entering into any form of spiritual kind of gaslighting, and letting them question and have space to wrestle and not be afraid of what they're feeling or voicing towards God, knowing that we can really sojourn with them and that God's big enough to handle that. And we can be a presence of compassion in a space that's helping reconnect them to Him in safety. So, as a ministry leader and a pastoral caregiver, I think we need to honor and know our role in the boundaries. We need to work with other resources in the community and refer, and always be connecting our people for fullness of healing so it's holistic in the areas that they need, as well as understanding that our role is deeply important and there's a deeply spiritual element to people's life and trauma and healing that's needed, and that our spiritual resources in life and practices are powerful and beautiful, and we have a role to play in healing trauma. There's deep purpose in the work we do and deep purpose in the spiritual life for people in trauma recovery. And we want to learn to be careful and not wound others deeper with trauma, but help reconnect and reconcile them to God.